Welcome back to the Dad Days, everyone. I'm Josh, and today I'm going to be making some homemade broth in the Instant Pot, and I'll even be sharing some footage of some homemade sourdough bread and even a protein smoothie for lunch. So spend some time in the kitchen with me today. I'm going to be making a batch of homemade broth today. So one thing that we do in our kitchen as we food prep and cut up vegetables or meats, if we roast a chicken or whatever, we always save our scraps. So we have vegetable scraps and meat scraps. We keep them in the freezer, and once we have a few bags worth like this, we're able to thaw them out and use the Instant Pot and make a big batch of broth, and that's what we're going to do today. So I have enough. I'll probably be making 2 batches. I fill up the Instant Pot with water and as much as I can fit in the Instant Pot. I cook it for 1.5 hours. That's enough in the Instant Pot to produce a really nice broth. If I was simmering it on the stove, I would have to simmer it at least 4 to 6 hours to produce the same quality broth. So the Instant Pot's a huge time saver. It's really nice. This bag has way more vegetable scraps in it than the other bags. We still have some leftover turkey scraps and ham scraps from Thanksgiving and holidays. So I'm going to blend both batches together before I end up pouring it into, we use quart size freezer bags and do about 2 cups per bag and freeze it in the freezer so we can use as little or as much as we want. It's a really nice method that works for us. Like I said, I'll blend it together. It won't really matter. It'll just make a really nice vegetable meat broth. So the first step is to just dump it in. Use as much as you can. Okay, save the rest for the second batch. I'm just going to fill this up with hot water and start the Instant Pot for 1.5 hours, and we're good to go. Now that the stock's going, I'm going to make a smoothie. I'm starving. This is what my lunch looks like 85% of the time. I love having protein smoothies for lunch. So I'm just going to walk you through exactly how I make it and what I put into my protein smoothie. So the first thing is I use a few frozen strawberries, literally just like 3 or 4. And I always have frozen bananas on hand. I usually break them up and I freeze them in pieces. So I always add 2 pieces of frozen bananas. I add frozen spinach. I freeze a whole bag of it and then I crush it up, and I usually add about 4 scoops of frozen spinach. frozen blueberries. Everything's frozen, by the way, as far as the food ingredients go. I add 3 scoops of frozen blueberries. I really like this brand. I don't know what grocery stores carry it, but that's what I use for both of my strawberries and my blueberries. So I've recently started adding brewer's yeast powder to my smoothies. It's really nice because it's super high in protein. There's 17 grams of protein in only 2 tablespoons. So it doesn't have a lot of flavor when you add it to smoothies. And there's a little bit of calcium, iron, and potassium, but I'm mainly using it for the protein enhancement. So 2 tablespoons of brewer's yeast. I add flaxseed meal. One scoop. It's about 1 tablespoon. It just adds a little extra fiber. And then I also use a protein and green powder, which has 20 grams of protein in 1 scoop and tons of other fruits and veggies and greens. It's just loaded full of stuff, so it just makes me feel good getting more than just protein. I'm also getting some added greens. And then I use whole organic milk, which also has 8 grams of protein in 1 cup. So I don't follow macros, so I don't know exactly what all is in here, and I kind of wing it every time I make it, but it's somewhere between 40 and 50 grams of protein in this smoothie, which is what I aim to add to my diet. Give it a little shake, and then I'll just blend it up. I love it. Delicious. So I started this loaf of sourdough bread last evening, and I did a couple kneading sessions with it, but I let it proof overnight in the fridge. When you proof it in the fridge or let it rise, it drastically slows down the process. So where normally it would maybe take 3 to 5 hours to rise, you can put it in the fridge and it will double or triple the amount of time that it takes. So it's just a useful tip to know if you need to buy more time depending on your schedule. It's a way to make the proofing duration longer. I'm just going to fold this a couple times and get it into my proofing bowl for the final proof before I bake it later today. Since I've been baking sourdough bread for a while, I tend to wing it with my recipes. I do have specific recipes, but it always kind of turns out a little bit different every time. This batch is a little wet, so I'm going to just shake a little more flour onto it before I knead it this time, because I don't want it to be too wet for my Banneton bowl. As you can see, it's definitely a little wet, but it'll be okay if I use enough flour. Okay. So I'll just cover it with a tea towel and let it rise for a few more hours and proof up a bit, and then it'll be ready to bake. So I'll show it to you then. We buy our flour in bulk. I store it in these food grade 5-gallon buckets, and it has these, you can buy these screw top lids for them. So my everyday kitchen container just ran out, so I haven't found a better. I'm sure I could get some sort of scoop or something, but I just use a mug and scoop it out of the bucket into the container. This is just the white. I use white high gluten bread flour, and I use a 100% whole wheat bread flour. Okay, and that's that. The first batch of stock is done. So I use a strainer inside of a big bowl that we have. I'll just dump everything into here, lift the strainer out, and then I have a really big pot that I use, and that's how I will blend both batches of stock together. So once I strain all the scraps out of this first batch, I'll just use this bowl and dump it into my big pot. Look how dark, in just an hour and a half, it makes the most beautiful concentrated stock. It's amazing. So I'll just let this strain on top of the pot for 10 or 15 minutes to let everything strain out of the scraps as much as possible. Then I'll start the second batch and transfer this into my big stock pot to blend the two batches together. It's been about 10 minutes later. I strained the rest of the scraps, poured it into this big bowl, and I'm just going to transfer this bowl into this pot. And then once the second batch of stock is done, I'll transfer it in here as well. And that's how I will mix both batches together and blend them together. I'm going to put the rest of the scraps into the Instant Pot. Okay, that's my second pot. I've pushed as much of it under the water as possible. I'll do this for an hour and a half, and then I'll blend both batches together. My bread's been proofing for a few hours since I transferred it into the Banneton basket. So I'm going to grab my preheated cast iron Dutch oven out of the oven and transfer it so we can bake it for about 35-40 minutes, and we'll see what it looks like. I bake it for about 25 minutes covered, and then I uncover it and bake it for about 10 more minutes. So usually my loaves take about 35 minutes or so. So we will check back. The sourdough bread is almost done with its first 25 minutes. So I'll get that out of the oven, take the lid off, and we'll put it back in for the remainder 10. I'm just waiting on the last batch of stock to be complete so I can blend the two batches together. But let's go ahead and cut this open and see what the crumb looks like. That's pretty typical for my bread. It doesn't have a huge open crumb with the big air pockets. It's a little bit more of a sandwich type bread, but we honestly prefer it. The second batch of stock just finished, so all I have to do is strain it off and then blend the two batches together. Last but not least, before bagging and freezing, I will pour the second batch of stock into the first batch of stock, blend them together, and the only thing left will be to portion them out into, like I said earlier, we do 2 cups per quart bag, and then we can use as little or as much as we want. So I'm gonna go ahead and pour this into the first batch. So now it's all together. I'll just let it cool down and then it'll be ready to freeze. Okay, so the stock is finally cooled down enough. The way that I do it is I label the bags and then I put them, open them up as if you were doing like a trash bag in a garbage can, and I put them inside of another container just to stabilize the bag. And then once it's in the container, I use another measuring cup. I take a scoop out of the stock and I measure it. I'm able to measure it right to the 2 cups that I like. I do 2 cups per bag. And then I'm able to just pour it right into the bag. I squeeze all the air out of the bag, and then I lay it flat in the freezer, and that's it. I'll do one more bag. And that's all there is to it. I hope you enjoyed everything today. We made a batch of homemade broth. We made a loaf of homemade sourdough bread and a protein smoothie for lunch. If you enjoyed today's episode, give me a like and consider subscribing to my channel. And as always, stay tuned for more Dad Days.